They turn the noise, yeah, the mess we make. Machine Bun Kelly get caught in the fake. Facts and logic with a twist of chest. Strip it down to truth, yeah, forget the rest. Humor pulls the lies right out of the park. Look beyond the shadows, dissect the dark. Sparks of laughter fire up the night, bringing clarity when they blur the fight. Cut through the chaos, yeah, the tangled lies. Machine Bun Kelly with a set of clear eyes. Truths and jokes gonna rock this show. Step into light where the real facts glow.
Hey there, and welcome to the Punch Show. Just wanted to talk a little bit today about what I can only call a straight up purple bruise, double cheek ass whooping that was put on the Republicans last night by the Democrats. And there were Democrats from across the board. There were centrist Democrats that whooped some ass in New Jersey and Virginia. And there was Democratic Socialist Democrats that whooped some ass in New York City. Go Mamdani. And there was some really interesting stuff. I watched what I call Elon Grok. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but it seems like public-facing Grok on X versus private Grok will have two different answers to a lot of things. Public-facing Grok is just full-blown MAGA at this point. Private-facing Grok is more reasonable. But so I call public-facing Grok, I call him Elon Grok now, because it's like he's getting his talking points straight from Elon. So last night this morning I was reading this conversation, it wasn't mine, where he was going on and on about how this was not a repudiation of Trump because, Trump's endorsements won, which wasn't actually true. A lot of Trump's endorsements didn't win. But he was taking the aggregate of Trump's endorsements and the average and stuff like that. And the ones, the way Trump endorses people is he just endorses the people that are clearly going to win. It's like if I were to go and pick 2 touchdown favorites and get 90% of them right, that doesn't make me a football genius. It just means that I know, I don't pick close calls. So anyway, wanted to talk ass whooping this morning, not Trump. But in some ways it is Trump. Because there's a lot of stuff I've been seeing from the right about how, well, these were, races that the Democrats were going to win anyway. And, they maybe were going to win them anyway. There was some talk in New Jersey about how they were going to, whether they could win. There was the, was it the Attorney General? In Virginia, I think. Anyway, there were some races that weren't so close, or were supposed to be closer. Were supposed to be Republicans. There was some talk about, the whether Mamdani was real and whether or not Cuomo, who felt the noise last night, see, Cuomo, feel the noise. Anyway, I kept singing that last night. I was very happy about Mamdani winning. But there was supposed to be some, like they won some races that they were going to win. The pollsters said they were going to win. So the Republicans want to act like, oh, well, that doesn't mean anything. But it's not just whether you win or not. It's not oh, they won. It's how they won and how much they won by. So, like, these are just some counties in New Jersey that are in, this is Virginia versus Virginia and, Virginia and New Jersey and New York City based on 2024 versus 2025. So in Virginia, things had gotten tighter, right? It was only like they only won it by 5 points. She won it last night by 15 points. In New Jersey, they had cut it down to 6 points. She won it by 15 points. There was some talk about New York City and whether Cuomo was going to win, which I don't know what's wrong with people in New York, but Cuomo somehow went from being like the rival to Trump in 2020 during all of his little press conferences while he was murdering old people, and Trump was murdering everybody else. But now, like Cuomo decided he was going to run as an independent, and then they had the fascist the red beret guy, the raspberry beret. He wore a raspberry beret. Which again, I don't know why. I have to say it. He wore a raspberry beret. All right, so that's enough of my singing for one show. Anyway, the Mamdani didn't just win. He won a majority of the vote against like 14 candidates, and Cuomo got endorsed by Trump, even though Trump didn't like Cuomo and Cuomo didn't want Trump to endorse him, and they were both equally, insistent that they don't like each other, even though, Cuomo's out there talking about how bad diversity is. So anyway, Mamdani kicked both their butts, and Elon's butt, and Stephen Miller's butt, and Fox News's butt. All those conservatives that were all of a sudden big Cuomo fans, and the Democratic Socialist won. And he didn't. I mean, like, I think it's not just that he won or even how much he won by. So I got a comment here about Imagine Dragons. I don't know what that has to do with anything. I know my nephew is a big Imagine Dragons fan. Anyway, so you got this Democratic Socialist, this Muslim Democratic Socialist, who they tried to smear as being a terrorist or something like that. But anyway, he won big and against Trump's preferred candidate, against Trump's endorsed candidate. And it wasn't just that he won big. He had it looks like he'll probably end up getting more votes than people who voted in the last mayoral election. That's how much he won by. And it's not even just that. He got over 1 million votes, but he had over 100,000 people actively on the ground, like knocking on doors and getting people out there. So, I mean, imagine that. Like 1 in 10 of the people that voted for him were out there knocking on doors. Like, where? I don't even know if I've ever seen excitement like that. I've never seen enthusiasm like that. The only thing that comes close is the Obama enthusiasm in 2008. But Hillary didn't have it, and Biden didn't have it, and Harris didn't have it, and that's no fault of theirs. There's just something about Mamdani that really energizes people. So what you end up with is you've got a 9.2 swing in Virginia, and you've got an 8.7% swing in New Jersey over the 2024 election to 2025. There's this massive swing of 8, 9, and in New York City, 12 points. And I think that, like there's a lot of talk about what is causing that swing. Why is it all of a sudden There's these massive swings. One is for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years actually. 3 years. We'll say 3 years. It was like the only thing on the news every day was inflation, 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 and how somehow the Democrats needed to come up with an answer to inflation. And so the Republicans just ran on inflation. They're like, oh, what did the Democrats plan to do anything? Their little Inflation Reduction Act. Ha ha ha. They call it the Inflation Reduction Act. All it's going to do is cause more inflation. Well, guess what? After the Inflation Reduction Act went down, inflation steadily went down for the next 2.5, 3 years. Almost like the Inflation Reduction Act reduced inflation. And they're like, oh, you don't have any solutions. But the media ignored like a lot of the stuff that was going on, and they were just going with the horse race story. And it was always, the Democrats need to do something about inflation, even though inflation had nothing to do with the Democrats. The reason we had inflation was, well, there's like a few reasons. One was the initial one was the supply chain. So, for instance, we didn't have computer chips. Because we didn't have computer chips, we couldn't build new cars. So the price of new cars went up. And then because the price of new cars were going up, people that wanted to buy cars had to buy old cars. And so then the price of used cars went up. And so then the used cars and the new cars went up. And, like you have the same kind of cascade effect in everything else. Though then all the inflation is going up. You've got the ripple effect from some of Trump's tariffs that are now kicking in, and people are starting to feel that, like with the washing machines and the dryers. And then you've got, on top of all that, you've got companies that see the prices going up, and they're like, well, hey, you got like the food companies, like 3 or 4 of them control most of the food that goes into the grocery stores. And so they're like, oh, let's jack up our prices. We'll just agree to it, which was what Kamala wanted to address. So that was factored in. So there were a number of things. And then to some degree, there was probably some inflation, some part of it, maybe a quarter of it, that was just inflation from the Stimulus Act. But they act like the Stimulus Act couldn't create jobs. It didn't create any jobs, but it caused inflation, even though the reason that it would cause inflation is all the jobs it created. You put in the money to stimulate the economy by getting new jobs, right? So the only way that the Stimulus Act could cause inflation is if it gave people jobs. And then it's going to cause some inflation. But the hope is that the real wages, the average income, the new jobs end up paying, the people are making more money even after inflation, which for the last couple of years, by the way, they were. Once the supply chain aspect of it came in. So then you got, the Republicans basically won for free. They got this freebie, the most important issue. They could blame on the Democrats without ever having to say how it was the Democrats' fault. They claimed that they could do it better without ever saying how they were going to do it better. And then they could just run on that. And that was literally the number one reason that Trump won. Then exit poll after exit polls, they would say that the economy was the number one reason. And they couldn't say why they thought Trump was going to do it better. They had no specific plan. They would say, oh, the Democrats don't have a plan. Well, the Democrats actually did have a plan. The Republicans didn't have a plan. But the media did a terrible job of pointing out who had a plan and who didn't, and whose plan was. I even had a video I made, like one of my little slideshows, about what Kamala's plans for the economy were. And I had a MAGA come on there and he said, this is really good. Why isn't she talking about this? And I was like, of course she's talking about this. Where do you think I got my information from? And so it was just, the media did a really terrible job of actually saying what Kamala Harris's actual plans were, and just did more of the inflation is the Democrats' fault. And so then people went to the Republicans because that was the alternate choice. So then the Republicans come along, they win everything. They win the Senate, they win the House, they win the presidency. They have the White House or the Supreme Court already. It's just letting everybody do whatever they want. And you got Trump sitting there just slapping tariffs arbitrarily all over the world. And somehow that causes inflation because, that's what it's designed to do. It's literally the point of tariffs it's not to raise revenue, it's to raise prices. It has a secondary effect of raising revenue. But its main thing is to raise prices so that your domestic stuff can be more competitive. When you're dealing in a very specific niche, and so like you want to raise tariffs on one thing because you're trying to get a product, you want to incentivize that product to be built up domestically, it makes sense sometimes, although my brother, who is much smarter than me, will say never. He's got a PhD from Wharton, so I tend to think that he knows what he's talking about. He'll tell you tariffs are never good. There's no such thing as good tariffs. But anyway, you got the price going up on things, and it's not like if you look at the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, it can be a bit deceptive because it says 3.1%. But it includes everything from like meat and eggs and milk to gasoline and hotel stays. And so the price of necessities are going way up. The price of some other things, some niceties or don't really needs, like hotel rooms, have gone down because people are traveling less because they have to spend all their extra money on ground beef now. So you've got this kind of, very kind of lived experience of people in inflation versus the numbers. The other thing that I think, like you've got Trump talking about like stock prices, and less than half the country has stocks at all. You have some people that have 401ks where, like that's their retirement plan. That's not money that they have right now. That's not helping them afford the meat price. And a lot of that is like matched by their employer. So they're not like really, that is not affecting their day-to-day life. You've only got a few people that, a small percentage, like less than 10%, I think, that actually, like where they're actively involved in investment in the stock market, to where that's a thing that they're looking at in terms of how they're doing. So he's all excited about that. And the other thing about that, and this is really important, is you've got AI coming in with all of this stuff. And AI is really interesting because there's a bunch of money, and this has nothing to do with either Trump or Biden or any president. And it's not even really political. It's just, that's where everybody is headed right now, right? So we've got all of this money, almost all of the money invested right now is being invested in AI. And that's because of a few reasons. One is it's the one industry where Trump is like favorable to it. So it's like the one industry where people feel like it's safe. When you've got, like Mr. Erratic poops my pants, deciding whether or not to raise tariffs based on whether or not he's pooped his pants that day, then you get this situation where nobody wants to invest in manufacturing because they don't know what the, like what the cost of whatchamacallits or thingamadoodles is going to be tomorrow. So you can't plan an investment. He's got this big trade deal with China he's all excited and giddy about. But, like that, just a year from now, we're going to start all over again. So people can't invest long term. So they're not investing in other stuff. They're only investing in AI. And I can't remember. I looked it up recently. It was like 80% of our investments had all been poured into AI. And that's for like new businesses and everything. So the secondary effect of that is that things get complicated. You get so many businesses that things get really competitive. So a lot of businesses go under fairly quickly. And, you've got your big AIs, but you got all your little AIs too that just, they don't live very long. And so when they're making jobs reports and stuff like that, they have something called the birth death rate for businesses, not for people, like businesses. And you had this huge birth rate, and this started under Obama like 3-4 years ago, where all the people started investing all this money in AI. And because there were all these businesses being created for AI, what happened is people assumed, or like, I shouldn't say people assumed, the algorithm assumed that, determines how many jobs are being created. The algorithm assumed that all these jobs being created were, all these jobs were being created with all these new businesses. But since it's AI, and AI, a big part of AI is you don't have to have people do this entry-level work anymore. A lot of that entry-level work was not being done by people, it was being done by AI, which meant that these AI businesses weren't creating jobs at the level that we thought they were. And that's why first under Obama and then under Trump, you had these massive job report revisions, is because after a year comes by, you're like, oh, we didn't create all these jobs that we thought. And then on top of that, a lot of these jobs were temporary jobs. They were construction jobs and stuff like that went away after a year. And then because it's so competitive and all these businesses are going under, they went under. And so those jobs went away with it. So you had this illusion of really good jobs that wasn't there. And you have some people that are making a lot of money, and a lot of people that aren't making enough money. And you have, on top of that, these tariffs that are jacking up the prices of food and the stuff you really need more than the stuff that's nice to have, that if you're in the top 10, 20%, you're not feeling the pinch. You're actually going, oh, things are getting better. All right. So all of this stuff is coming home to roost on election day last night. You've got all the people, like 80% of the people in the country are in a recession right now. It's hard to get a job, and it's hard to get a pay raise, and the prices are going up. And so, you've got this stagflation going on. And it's real. For most people, it's real. And, in 2024, there was some element to that, but there was also not the element of like these arbitrary tariffs and the mass deportations that are making farmers go under and stuff like that. So there was concern, but it wasn't this bad. And it was also not like when Trump won, he was supposed to do something about it. And all he did about it was make everything worse. And so you had this backlash effect last night. And people are pissed. And that's where I want to come back to Mamdani. I think that the Spanberger and I can't think of Heidi, anyway, the other one, the one in New Jersey. Sorry, I can't remember your name. But, they were all focused on the economy. They all focused on, just being able to afford the essentials. Whether they're on the left or the right side of the Democratic Party, whether they're so-called centrists or leftists or whatever. I don't even know what those words mean anymore, because I hate those kind of things. Anyway, you've got You know, they ran on affordability. That's the buzzword now. Harris ran on affordability too. I would like to point out that she also ran on affordability. But you know, again, we just ignored what Harris said and just ran on the politics of the situation. So everybody ran on affordability. And I think that the two campaigns in New Jersey and Virginia were great. But I keep looking back at the 100,000 people on the ground, 100,000 pairs of feet on the ground for Mamdani. That is just sensational. And I think that's where we can go from just winning to winning in a landslide if we can learn from that. We need to give people something not to be against, but to have a way forward. I remember, like, I grew up in the 80s. I graduated from high school in 85. The first time I cared about who won was in the 80 election when it was Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. And there were like the long lines that were into the gas station. I was 10. 10? No, I was like maybe 12. And I knew that the lines were not Carter's fault. Like, I could read a paper. I did. Okay, I was a little bit of a nerd even back then. I was a news nerd. Used to read the Grand Forks Herald from cover to cover. But so I knew what the situation was. I knew it wasn't Carter's fault. I knew Carter was being blamed for it wrongly. I knew that Reagan was running up this big thing about how the Russians were a threat and they were going to catch up to us in the arms race and we needed to spend all this money on weapons or else blah blah blah. They were going to come get us, and I was just like, no, they're not going to do that. And you know, it turns out their crap didn't even work. It fell apart if you tried to fly the plane. And anyway, so he won on this fake platform, and then you know this supply side economics, and you know, if only rich people had more money, then they could invest it, and then poor people could get some of the money that they invested, just you know, because they would create jobs and so forth. And then you know, they called this trickle down economics. Well, the trickle didn't trickle. It never did. It's been 45 years. 45 years waiting for the trickle to trickle, and it never trickled. So maybe we can just shut up about trickle down economics. That doesn't work. Stop with your well, Keynesian economics doesn't work. Just shut up. Just shut up. If you think trickle down economics works, you are too stupid to argue with, and you have no place in ever trying to argue with any rational adult human being. My stuff bears back there no more than you. Because at least they know nothing. What you know is lies. And as Mark Twain once said, it's harder to teach somebody they've been fooled than to fool them. So anyway, got 45 years of this crap. And over the 45 years, we've just pushed away anything resembling socialism. And by socialism, I mean, you know, they call communism socialism, democratic socialism, taxing Democrats, whatever. Anybody to the left of Hitler is a commie to them. And so I think of this episode of Friends. I'm sorry if anybody doesn't like Friends, but Joey wins this yacht in a raffle. And Rachel is going to teach him how to sail because she knew how to sail from growing up with her dad. Her dad is rich and he has a yacht. And so he taught her how to sail, and she's going to teach Joey how to sail. And so they're out there and they're learning how to sail, and Joey's trying to have a good time. And Rachel's yelling at him all the time because he's not doing what he's supposed to do, and he's not learning how to sail like he's supposed to sail. So then she goes off on him, and she has this rant, and she says, "You're a green, and greens don't quit." And then Joey responds by saying, "Well, I'm a Triviani, and Trivianis quit all the time." And then Rachel says, "Oh no, I've been trying so hard to not be my mother, I've become my father." And I always think of that when I think of the last 45 years with American politics. We've been trying so hard to not be commies, we've become fascists as a nation. So we talk about, he's going to give people free train rides, Mamdani. And it's like, okay, first of all, nobody thinks they're free. Everybody knows they're paid for taxes. What he wants to do is not give everybody free train rides. He wants the taxes to pay for people's train rides. That's a different thing, because everybody pays taxes, right? Like, only rich people don't pay taxes. Actually, only rich people don't pay taxes. That's actually true. Rich people, anyway. Middle class people pay taxes too, and so do poor people. And especially when you get on the local level, poor people pay a higher percentage of their taxes than the rich people, because the taxes that you pay on a local level tend to be sales taxes, which are regressive in nature. And so Mamdani talks about, let's tax the wealthiest New Yorkers 1% or 2%. And the entire nation wigs out. I should say the entire nation over 45. Everybody that grew up during, like the Cold War. All of a sudden, we're communists. Donald Trump is sitting there saying, he's a communist. People under 45 that didn't grow up with the Cold War were just like, what do you mean he's a communist? And what's happened is over these last 45 years, we've had an aggregation of wealth at the top because we don't tax them and we tax the poor instead. And Donald Trump is doing that even more. And so we have had wealth transfer over the last 45 years. They're always like, you're talking about wealth transfer. No, I'm talking about stopping wealth transfer. What I want is wealth flow. I want the wealth to flow from the top to the bottom, because the natural economy of things is that it will always go back up, right? Like if I spend money, I go to McDonald's and I spend $10, like maybe $1 that ends up being profit for the owner, and then the owner has to pay 10 cents of that to the CEO of McDonald's or whatever, because they've got the franchise fees and all that. And they've got to buy their burgers from McDonald's. So a certain amount of the money that I spend at McDonald's, some of that goes to the local franchise, but some of that goes to the rich person. Every dollar you spend, some of it goes to rich people. There is a rich people tax every time you spend money. Every time you spend money, there's a rich people tax. Rich people are getting a part of that. We don't think about that. We don't think about that as taxes. But there's a bit of money that they get that goes back up. And so the natural way that economy flows is money flows up by just natural law. The trick is to get it to trickle down. How do you get it to trickle down? And the best way to trickle down is through taxes. That's how you get the money to go from up to down, and then it'll go back up. And then when you've got that circulation, like a nice healthy fountain, when you get that circulation of money, that's how you know you have a healthy economy. Hi, Kitty. So we haven't had that. And there are people that are 45 and under right now that have never experienced anything like that. In 1980, there were about 2 million private farms. You'd drive down the street and you'd see a private farm. You'd see cows out there mooing and, doing cow stuff. And you wouldn't think that that was like a big, large dairy farm. Well, over the last 45 years, 25% of private farms have been bought up by large corporate farms. And then we're going to talk about, like, in we've got immigration laws that have made it harder and harder. H-2B visas make it harder to have labor, and H-2A visas make it harder to have immigrant farmers come over, especially if you're a small private farm, for a host of reasons I won't go into, but it's just become more and more expensive for farmers to farm. And as a result, they have lost their farms. And you have situations where, like these large corporations have moved into small towns. And so now you have a Walmart. We used to have, like, and right here where I live in Elgin, Texas, Walmart moved in and all the private, all the local shops shut up. And so people that used to own their own stores now work at McDonald's, or no, I'm sorry, work at Walmart. That's the way that it's worked. Is the money has flowed up, the jobs have gotten worse. And so the average pay for the worker used to be about 30 to 1. Like the CEO to worker pay used to be like 35 to 1 in like 1980. And now it's like 350 to 1. It's like, and so you got people that they've never known anything else. You've got entire generations. Millennials never knew anything else. Gen Z never knew anything else. Gen X grew up with, like, maybe you could, with the idea that you give your life working to a company and then you could get a pension. Now pensions don't exist. That's why we have 401ks. Pensions don't exist because the idea that you would work for one place for 45 years and then retire and, and then have a pension that you could live off, those things don't exist anymore. You don't have this view that you can work for retirement anymore. And then you have Republicans that are trying to take away our Social Security and make that even harder. So, now you've got to work until you're 75 before you can retire, because if you retire earlier, that means Social Security is going to cost more money. So it's like they give you 2 or 3 years of being sick before you die. And that's your life. That's the life you get to enjoy. If we haven't, like, completely consumed the planet by then. So you've got Republicans that spent 2024, well, like back before, they everything. Oh, the Green New Deal, Green New Deal, Green New Deal, as though the Green New Deal and climate change are like bad, like the idea that doing something about climate change is bad. And so you have these whole groups of people that are, and then the Democrats are spineless about it, right? They're not standing up and saying, yes, I support the Green New Deal. Because I'm not stupid. And I think that our children and our grandchildren deserve to have an inhabitable planet to live on. I think that they deserve to have civilization exist as we know it. I don't think that, like, when the Republicans say, oh, they're going to make our kids pay for our national debt. No, you're the ones that jacked up the national debt. You're asking literally Gen Z and millennials to pay for the debt that you jacked up. No, don't sit there and tell them that now it's their job to pay for it. Things got expensive and things got despair. The Republicans had their one last shot. People were like, okay, the Democrats, they got this inflation stuff going on. The media, they keep telling me that that's all happening. And the Republicans had their last shot. And what they did is they just made everything worse. Everything worse. They made inflation worse with their tariffs. And they made immigration harder. They've got like Gestapo ICE out there just snatching people off the streets. Nobody wanted to see that. Even a lot of the Republicans wanted to see that, didn't want to see that. They're all, yeah, you get some assholes that are like, oh, this is what we voted for. And that's why I call you a Nazi. Don't ask why I call you a Nazi. You can't sit there and be pro Gestapo and then get all irate that I'm calling you a Nazi. If you walk like a Nazi and talk like a Nazi and smell like a Nazi, you're a Nazi. And then you have this guy come along. This Muslim kid from Uganda with Indian parents. Nobody's ever heard of. You got to spell his name 11 times before you get it right. And see M, then N, like it's an alphabetical order in case, MAMDANI. That's in case you ever have to remember it. Anyway. So you have this guy that comes up, he's like 34 years old, and he's got people excited. And he's got some people excited with real answers. And they're socialist answers, and that wigs out a lot of people. But the people he doesn't wigs out are the ones that weren't raised on this notion that socialism is some kind of boogeyman. They're the ones that are looking at states like Finland and Denmark, like states, nations like Denmark and Finland and Germany and France, and to a lesser degree now UK, and like countries where democratic socialism has been applied and it has worked. It's worked. And they don't have to go around telling other countries how to run their country. They're not trying to overthrow leaders in other countries. They're just living peacefully, educating their young people. And as a result, the standard of living for everybody goes up. I don't know why we need to have people that are worth $500 billion. I don't know why the most sacrosanct, indisputable, fundamental right that an American have is as much as you want. But somehow that's a right, but being able to get emergency health care is not. Why does Elon Musk deserve unlimited wealth more than Jose Garcia deserves an emergency room visit? Or, Bob Newhart deserves just health insurance. Or, just average Joe deserves health insurance. Why does unlimited wealth triumph all other rights? I really would like to know that. I've never heard an answer to that. Why is that the most sacrosanct thing? And then the second one behind it is, like guns. Guns got to be able to shoot people in case they come and take my stuff. Because again, it's like the most sacrosanct right in America is mine. That's mine. Why does Elon Musk, deserve unlimited wealth? Well, it's his. Like possession is 9/10 of the law. And it's 10/10 of the Constitution nowadays. It's like all that matters is what you can have. And all of that is just in this knee-jerk, stupid-ass overreaction to communism. Like all of a sudden, anything that's, like public education is like bad. I don't have a problem with homeschooling, but some of these tuition vouchers and stuff like that are just designed to make it so that your white kids don't have to go to school with some poor black kids. And then we like make the public schooling even worse. Forget all that. Some socialism is good. I don't know who needs to tell you this, or, like, yeah, obviously with the military, that's something, but it's not just that. There's like, like investments and things. Taxes being spent on education are an investment. Just looking a little bit on my YouTube channel and on Twitter, there's I did a little thing on the life of Bob, and Bob grows up. Goes to public school. He goes to public college or state school. He gets his engineering degree. So the state, like, to pay for that education, ends up spending like $243,000 on his education from kindergarten through grad school, and he pays for some of it too in grad school, but he ends up providing in his taxes well over $1 million over the course of his life. So we invest $243,000 and we get over $1 million back from him just in the tax money we just that we invested. And the other thing is, it's not just that he's investing money. He makes about $4.5 million over his life. So he buys houses, and then people built those houses, and he buys food, and people, grew that food, and he buys refrigerators, and people manufacture that refrigerator. Like all of that course of his life, he makes money that he spends, which stimulates the economy more. So that money that we spend on his education is actually an investment in his education. And the same goes across the board. We pay for somebody's health insurance, and so they get their blood pressure medicine, or they get the operation they need, and then they live longer. And because they live longer, they pay more in taxes, and so it comes back. You've got even the public transportation that Mandani wants to use. That transportation means that they have a way to get to work and back, which means the employer is benefiting, and the employer benefits from public education because he doesn't have to teach all his employees how to read and write. When a nation spends money on its people, when it invests money on its people, the return on investment is greater than you think, and it's not accounted for. I always just look at it as, okay, we're spending all of this money. We're not spending money, we're investing money. And the return is what makes us great. The return is what makes the country better. What makes us great as a nation, if we ever were, is the people. It's not the land. The land is worthless unless people turn it, unless people grow things on it, unless people build things on it. People are what makes a country great. And socialism is just an investment in people. And either everybody's doing better or everybody is doing worse. You can't just stagnate. And I think that's where the frustration with the Democratic Party comes for, is everybody's, like the Democratic Party is like, why can't we just float here for a while? There's nothing to look forward to. There's no moving forward. Not since Obama has anybody come up with hope, change you can believe in. And, like with health insurance, in 2008, Oh, people talk just so ignorantly. Before the Affordable Care Act, health insurance was a hellscape. It was an absolute hellscape. My insurance premiums were going up 20-25% every year. It was insane. And then it's like, because I had a tumor in my right lung, like a bunch of stuff I couldn't even get covered for at all. And some people couldn't get health insurance, and they'd have ridiculous premiums hikes for things like, being on an antidepressant for 2 months, or for, like, a pregnancy was a pre-existing condition. It was like you couldn't get health insurance if you were pregnant. And now you can't get an abortion if you're pregnant either. So imagine if you can't get an abortion and you can't get you can't get health insurance for your pregnancy. It's like a 16-year-old girl gets raped and her entire life is destroyed. She's got to raise the rapist kid's baby, and she's in debt that she's never going to get out of, and she can't go to college because college is so expensive. Like, this is where we are at with our young people. And by young people, I don't mean, like, I shouldn't even say young people. I'm not talking about just like high schoolers. I'm talking about people that are in the 40s and their 30s. They're looking ahead and they're saying, oh man, what is there to look forward to? Well, Mamdani gave them something to look forward to. And we, as a society, need to give people that are younger something to look forward to. And I've been like really just thinking a lot about how I approach things and how I approach people. And I think, like, I tend to be angry. I'm like, I'm Irish ancestry and Italian raised. My dad adopted me when I was 5. So I've got like kind of a Sicilian and Irish temper, which, that's a mix nobody needs. And, and the thing that pisses me off the most is stupidity. And so MAGAs just send me into a visceral rage just by existing. And so I've been like trying to curb that in and like, and I just, so I think of like the farmers. I think about the farmers because I live in rural Texas and I used to live on a farm, and I've known a lot of people that are from small towns and have like small town attitudes. They've been raised their whole lives to think that the liberals are the evil enemy. They like, to them, when we talk about the difference between socialism and communism, we're just blah 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 blahing. Like it's like the Peanuts cartoon, like where the teachers are talking. That's all they hear. They're not like, they don't even hear syllables because it's just so ingrained. I think there's a word I like to use. I think it's underused. It's paradigm, and it's like, paradigm is your way of thinking. It's not just what you think. It's the whole way you perceive your reality is through your paradigm. And they just have this capitalist pseudo-American paradigm. And by pseudo-American, I mean this idea of the American dream. If you work hard, if you just stick to it, and you get up when you get knocked down, and American exceptionalism attitude, and you double down on all that, then you will succeed. And if you haven't succeeded, it's just you haven't succeeded yet. There's this idea that they can all be the next Donald Trump. They can all be the next Elon Musk. And that's why that unlimited wealth is the one thing that they will fight for, because it's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of doing enough work before they get there. Until they find out it's not. Until Donald Trump tariffs their, soybeans or whatever. are, puts tariffs on on the world, and they can't send their soybeans anywhere, or the stuff, like, they are impacted by things they can't control, and their entire lives are destroyed. Like, the suicide, I don't know if you know this, but suicide rates among farmers is like 3.5 to 5 times higher than it is against the national average. And I think it's a combination of these things, right? Like, they are super duper into this work ethic, will all that matters, and if you try hard enough you can get there. And then the whole, oh, the man is supposed to take care of the family, and if he can't take care of the family, he's worthless, and there's no excuses, and like all of that. And then this very real factor of crap is going on that they can't control, and they're losing their business. And they're not just losing their business, they're losing their family farm that their dad ran, and their grandfather and their great grandfather, and like, you go back 5-6 generations, that farm has been in the family, and now they're losing it because of things they can't control, because they can't get people to work there. And then if they do get people to work there, then Trump comes along and deports them, and they're not thinking about that. I get, like the whole, I didn't think the leopards were going to eat my face mentality. I get that. And I get why some people are like, ha, 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 ha. But the farmer that's losing his job isn't going to learn from that. If he, from that attitude. And so he ends up killing himself. And because that's the only alternative they see. That's like this kind of desperate, what I'm getting at is the kind of desperation that people in New York are feeling when they go and they vote for Mamdani. It's the same desperation that's on the American farmer. They have the same future in New York City and on small farm in Kansas. They've got the same future, which is none. They have the same frustration, which is they have no future. They just blame different people for it. And so we've got a political system that we have built that to where it's like gone from here's two competing visions for a future you can have, for ways to solve our problems, to we have two competing versions of who's to blame for all our problems. And the farmers blame the commies, and the commies blame the fascists. And I'm using those words hyperbolically on purpose. We need to stop looking at each other as farmers and fascists and start looking at each other as farmers and engineers or whatever. We need to start looking at each other as just other people. We need to start looking at each other as citizens, as voters, as people that have families and have futures that we want to actually survive for. We want to have grandkids because we want the world that they're going to live in to exist. Like my wife and I, we decided we weren't going to have kids because we just could not imagine children and grandchildren living in the world that we're leaving them with. Like, things are messed up. And they're so messed up that all we can do is blame each other. And so when you have somebody like Mamdani come along that says, hey, let's talk about answers. And to a lesser degree, Trump kind of did that. It's just his answers were stupid. And they weren't really answers, they were just yelling things. But he tapped into the frustration. That's my point. Mamdani and Trump tapped into the same frustration. The difference is Mamdani actually has answers. Other than, oh, all we need to do is just put tariffs on everybody. Like, Trump recognizes there's frustration. And Mamdani recognizes the frustration. What they're doing about it, their way of going about solving that frustration is different. But that's where the Democrats need to go. And that's where the Democrats need to learn from last night. Is what happened is it's not about whether Spanberger or Mamdani ran the right campaign or has had the right message. They both tapped into the frustration. But the way we're going to go forward is to have concrete, substantial things that people can get behind and believe in. And with Mamdani, you had that. And that's why one thing you had from him that you didn't have from the two new governors is feet on the ground. 100, I mean, like, just think about that. 100,000 people out of 1 million, 1 in 10. Just imagine if Kamala Harris had that ratio, had 7.5 million volunteers. With feet on the ground, going and knocking on doors. We could have a future. And we can still have a future if we try and just look at solutions instead of looking at one another to point fingers and blame each other at. Like I feel like sometimes I just should apologize to the MAGAs of the world for letting myself get baited into the same trap. Sorry, I didn't mean to get emotional. But you've got people that are so desperate that the only way forward they can see is to take their own life. Because everything they've known, like, is not going to sustain them. And it's not just the farmers. Like, the farmers, when they lose their farms, they live in rural communities, right? So all those stores start to go under. You've got rural hospitals which are going under, and the rural hospitals tend to be the largest employers. So you got whole rural communities being decimated. And, they're told, trans women in sports. And they want to be angry, and so they get angry about that. But now I think they're like looking at it and they're going, you know what? Trans women aren't the ones that are taking my livelihood away. And it's not the commie liberals that are taking my livelihood away. It's the person I voted for. And so like you're seeing this thing that Trump tapped into that now maybe we can tap into if we can talk to them instead of at them and sit down with them instead of yelling at them. Like we have the same frustration, we have the same basic energy here. Can we channel it in the same direction towards something positive instead of just hating each other? You know, that's the way forward. So I was looking at things and they like if you look at, and it's like we haven't even talked about Georgia, where there's some statewide elections. The first time I think this must be for state office and not for Senate or representative. They just landslide elections where they won by like 24 points. And like it had been like decades since somebody had won a statewide office in Georgia. You've got the Supreme Court justices in Pennsylvania that the Republicans channeled all this money into trying to win, and the Democrats held their seats, and it was like 2-1 almost ratio of people that were supporting them. And I look at these towns because this is like, now you're talking about some of these MAGA voters that I was just talking about, the frustrated, angry MAGA voters have flipped. And you look at 2026 and you start applying that same math, all of a sudden Texas comes into play. Cornyn's seat comes into play. And what's her name in Maine? I can't think of her name. I want to say Olympia Snowe, but that's the old. Anyways, the one who always has, strongly worded rebukes for Trump and says he'll learn his lesson. Anyway, like her seat is up and Cornyn's seat is up, and there's Tilla's seat in North Carolina. There's some Senate seats. We could flip 3-4 Senate seats, and we could flip 30, 40, 50 House seats. Like they and the thing is about if you're talking about these 8-9 point flips, like we saw last night, where it's not just that these Democrats won; it's that they won by double digits. They won by 8, 9, 10 points more than what they won by. It's this the difference that matters, not just the difference in who won, but the difference in percentage that voted for them. Because once you start applying that, you're going to have states, you're going to start flipping a lot of these representative seats. And this is where the whole gerrymandering thing that they're talking about doing can come back to bite them in the ass. Is like you have these safe 10 point districts, right? That all of a sudden, to make new Republican districts, you have to thin out some of these these other Republican districts, and then you end up, with 2 6-point districts for Republicans, right? But then you end up with a 9-point swing, and all of a sudden you lose both of those districts. So they could also like lose seats due to gerrymandering, believe it or not. Because if you get like this kind of swing that we saw last night in a lot of these gerrymander districts, you're going to see a lot more you're going to see a lot of these intended gerrymander districts go down. And some of the ones that were gerrymandered down are going to go down. So you're going to have like a 30, 40, 50 House seat change. And then you can also, although it's less realistic, could see us take the Senate. And then in 2028, who's going to, head up the Republicans? We always talk about who's going to take the mantle for the Democrats. Do you really think JD, the couch fornicator Vance, is going to do it? I don't. He's not. He's about as charismatic as a bowl of muddy water. And who's after that? You think it's Ted Cruz? Even Ted Cruz's own face doesn't like Ted Cruz. You think it's Mike Johnson? I don't. He's got a smirk only a mother could love. And I don't even know if his mother loves it. Like, there's no one I cannot think of anybody that's going to, is it Donald Trump Jr.? Is it Eric Trump? Is it Ivanka Trump? It's not going to, and that's why they're like floating this idea of a third term for Trump, which is unconstitutional and impossible, because they know that there's nobody else. They don't have anybody on the wings. Right now, the Republican Party just handed itself over to Trump just so they could win. There's no one left. There's no one there. Who's going to win in 2028 for the Republicans? You tell me. I don't see anybody. None of the governors like him. Greg Abbott? You think it's going to be Greg Abbott? He's a Republican governor that likes Trump. But no. That man can't even dodge a tree. I don't see who's going to win for the Republic. I don't know who's going to. We talk a lot about the Democrats. The Democrats have a lot of promising people, like Mayor Pete, whatever we're calling him now, Citizen Pete. He's really good. You got Newsom, although Newsom kind of irked me with some of his trans comments. You've got some the Pritzker up in Minnesota, or up in Illinois, and you got Walz in Minnesota, and you got Wetchen in Michigan. You've got a lot of really strong candidates. And then, you've got people in the House. Personally, I'd love it if AOC ran. You want to go more moderate? Somebody like Adam Schiff. There's a lot of really good Democrats. A lot of Democrats that I could get behind. I cannot see anybody that I can't even fathom who the Republican would be. Like, it's got to be somebody from out of the blue. You look at the 2028, like whatever. Just they're a joke. They're just a joke. You had the 2024 ring of wannabes. Trump beat them without even running against him. Like, there was no, they didn't even have a second place there. It was like a colossal joke. Rubio. What Republican is there? There is no Republican. And that's why they have to go to like unconstitutional answers. The Republican Party does not exist anymore without Donald Trump. So I feel like after last night, I feel like there's a chance to hope again. But I hope it's not just hope that we can get back to normal. I want to get back to believing in a country that can move forward. And I don't think we can do that just, with all the leftists, like binding together or something like that. Like, we need to be able to find a way to talk to other similarly frustrated people across the aisle. So anyway, I've run out of things to say. Thanks for watching. I will talk to you probably tomorrow.